Welcome to the Word Podcast. The Lord God has given us His Word. Let us learn it. Let us live it. Let us rejoice in it. Spread the Word.
Blessings, everybody. This is Dale. Thank you so much for joining with me today on the Word Podcast. We continue through the Gospel of John, the 13th chapter. And the last couple of episodes, we've seen where Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. And he explained to me, he said, you don't understand why I'm doing this now, but you will understand it. But it is a picture for you. He says it's an example for you. And if I do this for you, then you need to do it for one another. And he wasn't just talking about the actual act of washing the feet. He spoke of how the messenger is not greater than the one who sends the message, or that the servant is not greater than the master. That we need to walk in humility before one another and honor one another in all things. Well, immediately after that, Jesus' spirit was grieved. His spirit was troubled. And he said in verse 21 of chapter 13, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Well, the disciples were looking back and forth at one another, wondering who it was. And so Simon Peter looked at the disciple whom Jesus loved. That's how John, who's writing this gospel, that's how he described himself. And John was sitting next to Jesus. So Peter looks at him and he motions at him and said, find out who he's talking about. So that's where we pick up today, verse 25. So that disciple, this is John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus had a very intimate relationship with all his disciples, but apparently even more so with John. As I said the last time, you see all these groupings of relationship that Jesus had with the multitudes, the 5,000 to 4,000, with the 70 disciples that he sent out two by two, with the 12 that he spent 3.5 years with. Of those 12, there were 3 that we see him with that had particular encounters, and it seems to be a special closeness. And then he had one, and John was the one. For lack of a better term, one really, really close friend, but it wasn't quite like that, okay? But here John is literally leaning back against Jesus in that type of physical proximity to him. And John asked him, Lord, who is it? Verse 26, Jesus answered, it is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now they're reclined about a table. They're reclined eating. They're not sitting in the way that you see the great picture of the Jesus and the 12 disciples, right? They're reclining. But Jesus is within arm's reach, apparently, of Judas. Judas was close to him. Verse 27. Then after he, that's Judas, had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, what you're going to do quickly. And so Judas had already agreed to betray Jesus, and he was looking for the opportunity and looking for the moment to do it in. When Jesus dipped this morsel of bread, or as the King James says, the sop, S-O-P, when he dipped it and gave it to Judas, when that occurred, verse 27, Satan entered into him. Satan entered into Judas. The next phrase is what Jesus says, what you're going to do quickly. The question is, who's he speaking to? Is he speaking to Satan? Is he speaking to Judas? Is he speaking to both of them? I suspect it's both of them, because now, yes, he's speaking to Judas, the corporeal being right here, okay? He's speaking to Satan, who is now in him. Jesus would have seen Satan in the eyes of Judas. And so Jesus is speaking to Satan, and Satan is doing what he's doing through Judas. What you're going to do quickly. Verse 28. Now, no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So the other disciples didn't really know why it was and what was going on. That little thing right there, that we need to buy something for the feast, that's an interesting little tidbit of some things. You know how I've made a pretty big deal that this meal that they were gathering around and having right here was not the Passover proper. People are always saying that this was the Passover meal. When you think it through, it's just physically impossible because Jesus was the Passover lamb. He was going to be killed later that day. Okay, at 3 o'clock that afternoon, he was going to die. He's going to be on the cross at 9 later that day. Remember, the days began at sunset, at evening. And so Jesus, there's no way that he could be the Passover lamb and be eating the Passover meal proper. And right here, the fact that they thought that Jesus was wanting to go out to buy some things that they needed for the feast, that's a little hint that the feast was still yet to be. Also, we see that it was part of the tradition that they would give something to the poor out of what they were sharing. Now, verse 30. So, after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. So Judas gets up immediately after Jesus had washed their feet, after he declared that somebody was going to turn against him. Somebody was going to betray him. Then, after the betrayer was revealed, though the disciples did not know that's what occurred at that moment, but looking back shortly, they would understand what had happened. After that, he goes out. Then verse 31, let me just read this first verse or so, and then we'll pick it up later. When he had gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. Now, Jesus has made this statement, before he did in the previous chapter. Remember when the Greeks came up and they wanted to meet him, and Jesus' response is, now is the time for the Son to be glorified. Okay. Now he's saying, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. And Jesus is about to say things and share things with the disciples that he wanted to say to them, but it's without Judas being present. Okay, it's without Judas being present. And this was not by happenstance. This was by design. And the Lord is going to give them his last words prior to the time that he's killed and then resurrected 3 days and 3 nights later. Well, again, I'm Dale. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next time.